father worked for my father. And George came to the program that I did in my hometown, and then he invited me here to their museum. But I know he's someplace warm, so. So I'm from Tully, New York, south of Syracuse. And I brought my husband Ed and my brother John, also. So we're here to tell you the story of my dad. He was a B-17 pilot in World War II. Had a crash and prisoner of war camp. So what we've discovered is his parents saved everything. Wow. We have every letter he wrote, every letter his parents wrote, all of his handwritten training material, all of his medals, and of course his uniforms. So I'm going to zip through, tell you the story, and then so that you have time to look through things. So did anyone know Dad? My dad, Charles Bennett from Ed. He was a member of the.
Didn't you know your dad?
A long time ago, yeah, so.
Come on, John, raise your hand.
Yeah. John, my husband.
I remember Charlie.
You remember Charlie? Okay.
We flew over his funeral.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. There was
Collins
a
Foundation.
over my dad's funeral. Yeah, over the cemetery. Yeah, yeah. It's all pretty exciting. Since we started collecting things, they were, spread out over the family. Yes, and discovering, just all these great things. So I've decided for my retirement mission to go to high school. And because I worked in nursing homes, I've been going to nursing homes, but I'll be taking things around. And, I think all of our high schoolers need to know. They take world history in 10th grade, so that's when I will be going to school. Yeah, I did it once in my school, and they loved it. Of course, I didn't know there were 5 classes a day. I forgot. Yeah, so it was a long day. Dad, of course, knew, World War II was coming, and he'd already had his pilot's license as a young boy, and did decide to enlist in January of '42. He did want to fly. He started off, he's in this picture in the bus load in Buffalo, and then on to, they shipped them everywhere. Everywhere. And they start with airplane mechanics school. So he's got a lot of letters there. He didn't pass the physical to become a pilot. So he started with working on airplanes. And it tells a story of one day his parents came to visit him in Illinois, and he signed out overnight and came back the next morning, and his whole unit had shipped out. Left him. Which was fine. So he had to be reassigned. He had another story of getting a weekend pass to Chicago, but instead he took a train home to his brother's wedding. So I don't think they can do those things anymore. So a lot of it, as I say, my grandfather owned the Bennett hardware, and so a lot of the letters would be, you can see the letterhead from the Bennett hardware. It's probably my dog or We also have my grandmother wrote in her diary almost every day from 1942 until her death. So actually we found a lot of dates, some very specific dates of where Dad was from her diaries, and I've got those are all typed up in here as well.
How old was he?
90 something, 1916. Yeah, he died in 2002. Most of the letters from his parents would say, "Oh, we're so glad you're not flying. Stay on the ground." But well, Dad's intention was to learn how to fly. And he did pass his physical in December of '42 and ended up in Texas. We have a lot of pictures of Dad on airplanes. He would send negatives home, and his parents would make pictures. And then, they're all messed up right now, but someday someone will be able to tell me from his letters it says which kind of training planes he was in, and somebody will someday be able to look at those pictures and figure it out. That's in the future. I'll do that someday.
There's lots of places on the internet.
Yeah.
I think most pictures people will tell you a lot of information.
That's pretty exciting, yeah. So we have his yearbook from Greenville, Texas. So they actually put out yearbooks, and the book has all these things around. Yeah. And there's some of one of his earlier pictures. One of the, they send out, apparently the different companies would do crash bulletins. They send out little newspapers, and they would compare how many accidents they had training. That was pretty funny. A lot. So it ended up in Ellington Field, which was some of the final training. And that was a 10-week course, and all his homework is here in these booklets. At graduation, of course, becomes a second lieutenant. And we kept finding these discharge papers. Well, I couldn't figure that out, but they discharge you from the Army, and then you were reinstated into the Army Air Force. Army Air Force, yeah. So that was interesting. I couldn't figure out where these discharge papers came from. So one of the letters that Dad sent home, he had asked his parents, besides money, he always asked in the letters, he'd asked for an Army short coat, because he was an officer now. He wanted an officer short coat. So you can see that it isn't very well worn, because he really never got to wear it. He was shipped to England, but this is his Christmas present. It is something, yeah. Some of his escapades, we call them. He went to Panama for a few days practicing flying. And once as a co-pilot, my brother said he was in a B-24, not a B-17. He was co-piloting, but the pilot went to his hometown in Arkansas, right down Main Street, and clipped the wire. And they weren't sure they were going to get back to that. So, yeah, they were bad boys. So. The next stop was Kearney, Nebraska, and that was for the final B-17 training. And from there, he went off to the Port of New York, which is where the pilots, he was assigned his crew. And can you pass those on to the next table, so we want to keep things going. Great. So his parents were able to drive down, because they from Bloomfield, Canandaigua area, they were able to drive down and see him in the Port of New York, and that was all in our grandmother's diary, so that was pretty lucky.
Janet,
Yeah.
when did he spend any time in Delhart, Texas, where we went?
Oh, it's all in here, I don't know.
I should
One of
tell
the
these,
trainings, yeah.
tell these folks, only in Texas. The only thing that indicated there was Quonset huts there was a whole bunch of little concrete abutments where they were out in the field.
Yeah.
But one hangar, and we drove up to the hangar, and only in Texas would you see a Constellation crop duster.
Wow.
They had taken a Connie, and I don't know how many 1,000 pounds of stuff could he put. Yeah, and they had all the way out the wings. They had nozzles. Sprayer.
So just one of his books I'll send around. This is Recognition of Ships. So lots of things to learn.
How long have you been, how long?
I've just been retired a year, so this is.
So you're learning lots.
Yeah. Yeah, keep reading and, yeah, finding new
What year
things.
was he in New York? What year was he in New York?
Oh, when he shipped to,
When did he ship out?
it would have been December. It was in December of 43. You know, because he enlisted it. 42. December.
42?
Yeah, so we went 43. But we weren't in.
Yeah, we sure were.
Yeah, we were.
We were right up to our
Yeah.
elbows.
43, December 43. Yeah. So the picture that's coming around of his crew, that plane is Old Hickory. He didn't really fly that one, but they had to have a picture in front of it.
Just to be posed in front.
It has to be posed. So they were shipped to Molesworth, England, is where his base was. It was the 303rd bombing unit from the 8th Air Force. Mom and Dad actually went there in 1994 on one of the tours. So, yeah, pretty exciting. So the bombing missions, he flew out of Molesworth. They went on a rail yard in Brussels, an airport in Dijon, France, and a rail yard in Germany, and a V-1 bomb installation in Calais. he used to tell one story about, they'd come back from missions, and the crew in the back would be schnockered. And they couldn't figure it out, because you can't, you know, they don't take alcohol on. They were
Toxic?
syringing oranges with vodka. And eating the oranges. So on their way back, while these guys are in the back of the airplane are sucking on the oranges.
Wow. We need more courage.
Yes, for sure. So on April 13th, 1944, Dad took off for Schweinfurt, Germany, through a ball bearing factory. So this is, of course, the map of Germany, and their destination was here. And we have the actual formation here. He was, what's it called, Ed?
Tail end Charlie.
He was Tail end Charlie, so we actually know it's all in this book. With the red
High slot, last plane.
Yep. And we have the actual description of the flight and the map of the flight is right here also. So they were the first ones shot at by, the ME-109s. Shot out 2 engines and did turn around and head back to England as best they could, and then were shot at again. So the tail end was shot out. So the tail gunner basically, looked out the tail end and said, "I'm jumping," and he jumped out. And there's a story about Billy Farrell. He actually was a substitute. He wasn't the regular crew. He was a last-minute substitute, was Billy Farrell. And his story about, it took him 5 or 6 months to go through the underground, and he's the only one that made it to freedom. And everybody else was taken prisoner. So Dad and the pilot had the crew jump out. We've got that actual site here. And so the town that this big B-17 was aimed at was called Mettendorf. Very, very small village. My husband and I have been there. They did everything they could to not hit the village. So they had the crew jump out, and then a last minute hike of the airplane so they could get high enough so the pilot and co-pilot could get out. It's funny, because if you read Jack's story, he was the last one out of the airplane, and I embarrassingly say my father's story says he was the last one out. So. But it's verified Dad was not the last one out. He was the second to the last. So they jumped out, and the airplane crashed to smithereens. So we actually have the site. We've been to the site and seen the ditch. So I will pass that around. So the way we were able to get that information was, amongst my dad's things, and I kind of remember the day that we got this information, was in 1994. They got a letter from a gentleman in Germany who was writing a book about his area in Germany and the war. And he had gotten the airplane information from probably our government, and he can get that stuff. And he wrote to the pilot, to Jack Leeds. He wanted our description of the crash and what happened that day. So Jack wrote the letter to my dad, and they both wrote their story and sent it back to Germany. And it was put into this gentleman's book. So this was probably actually 5 years ago. I was reading through some of the things, and I saw that this gentleman had asked, my dad about his crash. So I thought, well, he might be dead, or he might be 100 years old, but I'll write him a letter and say, we're coming to Germany. And lo and behold, one Sunday afternoon, I've got everything out on the dining room table, and I get a call from Germany, from this man that's writing the book, and he invited us, and he actually took us to the crash site. There's still a ditch there. So these are the 2 folks here. And then he also introduced us to a gentleman who was 6 years old and actually was there the day that my dad's plane crashed. So the gentleman in the middle here, Peter, he was a farmer, and he farmed the field where Dad's airplane crashed. And And for years, I think they did pick up pieces, and the villagers, there wasn't much left, but the villagers kind of spread them out, and they couldn't find any more. But he did have 50 caliber machine gun shells from the crash site. So the eyewitness had given the 5 shells to the author, because he'd been researching the area. And right in that field, the author gave them to me. So my brother and my 2 sisters have one, and we've got one left for the display. So we have the actual 50 caliber machine gun shell from the crash. So
That's a long ride.
yeah. So also up here you'll see the telegrams. So his parents were notified. So he crashed on April 13th. That's a copy, but I have the actual telegram that his parents got. They were notified on April 27th, of course, that Dad's missing in action. They used the word sympathy a lot. It must have been, awful. There's several more letters other than just the telegram, but they said, with our deepest sympathy, your son is missing in action, but they never would say, he had died. And so it wasn't until, from April 27th until June 24th, that his parents got the next telegram that Dad was a prisoner of war. So that's how long it took to worry and to get that information. So we have the route. So did I cover the crash, Ed? He's my assistant.
You did pretty good.
Yep. We got the crash route, yeah. So they were picked up by, a couple of home guard, a couple old guys. The guy said it looked like Daniel Boone coming out of the woods. So picked up by the home guard. There wasn't much activity because there's no big cities in that part of Germany. And they actually thought they had crashed in Luxembourg, not in Germany. And it wasn't until 50 years later that they discovered that they actually crashed in Germany. They had a little prison that was like the second floor of a hotel or something. And they had an interrogation there. Then they had to walk 20 miles to Trier, which was the main interrogation center for that area of Germany. They had to walk.
You got to explain, if they were not interrogated by the Nazis.
The Nazis, right.
They were interrogated by the Luftwaffe.
Right.
And
Yes.
actually, the Luftwaffe owned every POW that was shot down over Germany. They didn't care whether he was an enlisted man or an officer. They belonged to the Luftwaffe. So they were treated pretty good.
So then they were trucked up to Frankfurt, which is the main interrogation center. And actually, somewhere I have a whole bunch of information about that. The other thing I forgot, is we actually know who shot Dad down from this man in Germany. So we actually know who was doing the ME-109s that day and who actually shot Dad down. Walter Matoni, age 19.
Milwaukee?
So then they were trained, bussed, carred in a car, actually, up the Rhine, up and over. Actually, one night they had to get out of the boxcars because the British were bombing. So, all the way up, he was in Stalag I. So that's way up on the Baltic Sea. And that's where the officers, they were all officers. And we have also been there, so we have pictures of that as well. Dad's brother, Bud, was stationed in England, and he was trying to get, as much information as he could. He was, able to get a little more information to their parents. So then we have just all kinds of information from the actual prisoner of war camp. And that's more over here, Dad's picture. That's mostly what Dad's story is about being a prisoner of war. We have cigarettes and his candy. The Red Cross sent booklets. And Dad apparently was the scribe. So this is all in Dad's handwriting. They made up poems. They took modern songs of the time and changed the words. They did recipes, and all the list of everybody that was in the prisoner of war camp is in these as well.
Now you gotta read some of the Dear John letters.
Yes, I definitely will read the Dear John letters.
Oh.
So another thing recently I discovered, they did a lot of sports and exercise. They walked. We have an original book called Not As Briefed, which was written and illustrated by a man that was in prisoner of war camp. And what he did was sell the book before they left prisoner of war camp. And then he actually had the book published, and it was delivered to all the men. So we have a signed copy that I don't carry around with me. But these are three actual illustrations of the prisoner of war camp that you can come up and look at. And this is actually the Stalag one. And also, if you've read, there's a man from Salamanca, his daughter has written a book recently. It's at the Enwell World War II Museum. I didn't bring those books, I don't know why. But there's a very good book about a man from Salamanca who was also a Stalag Luft. His daughter's written a book. So here's pictures of the actual camp. It was just plain cold there. Both of the information again. But they had, of course, the Red Cross parcels. And because he was an officer, he was lucky. And also because he was near the port city, a lot of the Red Cross things came into the ports. And so by the time they got to some of the other stalags, you know, they were stolen. And so he was pretty lucky to be close to the port cities as well. But of course, they were pretty much always hungry, but they had a library. They also had instruments. They had a band. So it was the YMCA that I didn't realize, besides the Red Cross, the YMCA was very active during wartime, sending equipment over and fun things for the prisoners of war. There were about 9,000 men in Stalag I. And towards the end of the war, 2,000 men arrived from one of the stalags that was more in Poland, I think. And as the Russians came, they kept moving their prisoner of war, so they kept doubling up. So there were 24 men in a room instead of 16. So, pretty close quarters. They were able to write letters, and those letters are here. They could write 2 letters and 4 postcards a month. And their parents also got all the information on exactly how they could write letters to the prisoners. They had to be typed, and all the stationery is here, so all that information is here also. In the blue booklets, Dad made copies of some phrases from some of the Dear John letters that these poor guys got. They're pretty sad. This is to a sergeant from his wife. Darling, I have been living with a private since you have been gone. Please don't cut off my allotment, though, as he doesn't make enough money for us to live on.
Sure, no problem.
This is to a lieutenant from his wife. Do you get to town very often? I'm going to file for a divorce. Mother and I have talked it over, and since you have been gone so long, we decided this was best.
Mother and I.
Yeah, mother's no best.
True patriots back
I find it difficult to live on your $200 a month.
Or you.
Yes. To a lieutenant from his wife. How's your mother and dad? I haven't been able to see them lately. Like, they know? They're
They drop by the prison camp all the time.
In your May letter, you asked for slippers. What color would you like? So by the time he gets the letter, you know, the season is past. I hope you are being true to me. Can you buy beer, or do they just sell wine? I just had a baby, but don't worry, the American officer is sending you cigarettes every week.
Hey!
At least you got a cigarette afterwards.
So a lot of the songs are pretty good too.
Well, they're pretty good.
There's not much left there now. So this is the actual memorial. Where's my group here? It starts here and works its way around, huh? But there is a wonderful museum now. 10 years ago, a woman from BART decided that they were proud of what their community did for Stalag I. They felt they took, good care of the prisoners, considering the conditions, and also wanted to take some of the credit from the Russians away, because the Russians were not very pleasant when they arrived. So there are several stories about when the Russians arrived. So it was during the night on April 30th that the Germans simply walked away from Stalag I. And so the men in the prisoner of war camp, they kind of knew what was going on, but they weren't sure. So they basically, kind of guarded. Some of them, including Dad, walked into town and tried to get some food. When the Russians came, they basically, stole, they slaughtered 40 cows and had big feasts and drank a lot, stole all the alcohol. And so then it wasn't really till about May 17th. And that on YouTube does have an actual video of the Stalag I being flown out. So John found that, yeah. So thank you. We haven't really found Dad in there yet. But actually, Dad was one of the people they sent ahead. He stayed pretty healthy mentally and physically. And he was one of the men that went and worked on the runway so that the B-17s could arrive. So Dad was in that group. And so he was one of the last ones out because he was one of the healthiest. So
Getting work done.
yeah, that was it. So his parents found out by telegram May 27th of 45 years.
45.
45, yes.
45.
That Dad was back under control of the Allies.
What rank was he?
Second lieutenant. Yeah. He was actually, if his next mission, he would have been piloting. He would have been a pilot instead of co-pilot. He was ready to be up to a pilot in his next mission. It took, so there are other comics. They seem to have a good time. Lots of funny comic books that you can look through. And sad one. This one's, of course, called A Sad Story. So this was a painting that my sister had a friend paint. So we really had some questions about the Distinguished Flying Cross because we had the ribbons, and we knew he wore the ribbons, but there were those authenticity letters were either lost. What did we decide? All the Distinguished Flying Cross letters. There was nothing that indicated he had one. He had the ribbons. He wore them. They're on here. So we're assuming him, but there's no records of where you can find out if he actually was awarded.
I think what you'll find if you trace back any of those guys that did something when they were going to crash, they handed them out. When they come home from the POW camps, they were issued.
So I bought a new one online, but I have original ribbons. So from landing, so he got to Boston he had a good time in France. We have all that Lucky Strike, all those camps. And then he made it to London with his brother, and apparently they had a really good time. So he made it to Boston June 26th, and then was in and out of the Army, reissued uniforms, and et cetera, until September of 45. And then all his parents' letters said, we can't wait until you take your place in the hardware. But yet his letters said the same. I can't wait to get home and be the uniforms, the other uniforms we have the actual pants that he wore for 13 months,
Wow.
which are kind of gungy. We're not sure about the hat. He did barter for a Nazi hat. And this is his actual, it has his name on it. And there's some other things in there. So that would be the uniform he was issued after he got back.
And the Foot Locker was shipped to your grandparents.
Yeah, so once you become a prisoner of war, the foot lockers are shipped to your parents. So that's the actual foot locker. Yeah. They ship everything. So that's why all the letters were, that's why everything was saved, because the Army sends the actual foot locker. And this was his actual jacket. And then he met my mother, and the rest is history. But yeah, please. And of course, the mother's flag, which those were hand sewn then. They still have those out now. We have his Purple Heart. But I really, want you, I can either pass the books around, or you can come up and grab one. I have the ears or in the front. Please take time to look things over.
Thank you so
Any
much.
other questions? I'll just end with the Combat Airman's Prayer, which is in one of the books. Please, dear God, just let me soar o'er green and yellow fields once more. When there'll be no dirty clouds of black, bring forth that anguished cry, flak, where sight of a speck out in the blue will not mean, watch it, fighters it too, where no screaming demon out of the sun make every man jump, and with flaming gun endeavor to pay another life to the devil who started this worldwide strife. If you don't think this too much of a boon, well, please, dear God, please make it soon. And a lot of prayers. I won't make you sing when I go to the nursing home. You sing. Once we were happy and now we're forlorn. Hang down in our chutes that were tattered and torn. They put us in Stalag to weep and to mourn, betrayed by a B-17. So yeah, please come and look at things. Or grab a book and have a seat. They're pretty much in chronological. The last one, of course, is Prisoner of War, and that's when it's on flight.
Quite all right.
That worked quite well, does it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's a Sony Handycam. It works very well.
I'm thinking about getting one.